Next up, we've got Ben Toms. He is from DataJar in the United Kingdom. I believe he's doing this after or before dinner. So thank you for being flexible, Ben. The talk is Administering Apple Silicon. Ben Toms, also known as Mac Mule, has been managing Apple devices since before the last processor transition, so quite some time. Throughout, he's been involved with the wider Apple admins community, and he's now the head of innovation and platform at DataJar. So really excited to see what you got for us. Also, his favorite device was the iPhone. I spoiled it. I just wrecked the joke. Just because it's a convergence device, pardon me. So I see you got some guitars there. That's a nice collection.
Thanks. I've had interesting responses to my office. This is actually where I've been working for 5 years. Some folks have been on Zoom gone, "Oh, bless, you're in the cupboard." No, this is my
no, it's garage.
Yeah.
It's a step up, right?
No, it's a little shed attached to the side of the house that I tend to do my work and play my dirty metal. And yeah, the family normally out there playing out away and stuff. So yeah, it's cool.
Right. So you've got a video for us, and you're going to be answering Q&A during or after?
During I'm here, I might as well type and respond as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, take it away.
Hi there, my name is Ben Toms. I'm the head of innovation platform at DataJar. You might also know me as Mac Mule. You can find me at macmule.com, as Mac Mule in the Mac Admin Slack, or at Mac Mule blog on Twitter. Today's talk in part came from a talk that I gave in March titled macOS Big Sur and Apple Silicon. And you can find a link to that talk, as well as links to any articles, any items I've mentioned during this talk within this GitHub repo, which is datajar/Mac Deployment 2021. For today, we're going to focus on the Apple Silicon side of things, and specifically the items that might trip us up for those of us who manage Apple's devices. So again, the administration of these Apple Silicon devices is what we're going to be focusing on. Several areas that we're going to be looking at. I'm not going to read these all out for you now, but we will be stepping through these in sections in an order. Some of these items will be one slide long. Some of these items will be quite a few more. So let's get going. First of all, back in summer, Apple announced they'd be changing the format of serial numbers. Way back in 2010, Apple went from a 11-character serial to a 12-character serial. Now, the thing that's always been available, that's been kind of an issue or been helpful maybe, depending on which side of things you're on with this, with these serial numbers, is that they've always been able to ascertain some details of the device. You know, when it was manufactured, the year, the week, and what model the device was. These kind of things that maybe were potentially bothersome to legal or from a security point of view, because if you start to disseminate some of these things, get an idea of when an organization ordered devices, potentially what type, where they've been shipped from, etc., you might be able to start to build out a serial number, and then you could use that to enroll into their MDM via the deployment program, formerly known as DEP, which is now called ADE. Now, part of that is as good a time as any to actually point out this white paper from the folks over at Duo, which talks about how you're going to secure your ADE enrollment. Since this came out in 2018, we can now secure much more than just the basic auth side. We can now use SAML and those different types of authentications, allowing multi-factor auth to make sure that if someone has a serial, they need to have credentials, multi-factor auth, etc., to proceed further in. But it's still a consideration. It's still something to worry about if you're enrolling if you're on a device of IDE. And these new serial numbers have started to appear already. Folks who have got iMacs, the new colourful iMacs coming in, have already started to see these numbers change, as well as some of the mobile devices. With the new Apple Silicon, we can also, with our Apple computers, we can also run iOS and iPadOS apps on those Apple computers themselves now. How does this work? Well, if we go to the App Store and search for an app that's not available on macOS, you can see here, for example, we're looking at Among Us, it's not showing, but if there's a tab there now underneath the results, which is iPhone and iPad apps. Click in there, you can see that Among Us is there because I've installed the app and I've run it under my Apple ID, which is the same Apple ID I've logged into my Mac with. Now, this isn't like an opt-in type thing or an opt-out type thing, but essentially developers can say, do you know what, our apps that we've got for mobile aren't suitable for macOS, or we do not want them available for macOS. So at DataJar, we do have iPhone apps, we do have iPadOS apps, but we are not making them available to macOS because we have a separate macOS app that does that. Slightly different functionality, different item, it wouldn't make sense. However, if you do download and install one of these apps, what you then see is a smaller window when the app launches. It's not going to be your full screen, it's going to be a bit smaller. It's based around maybe the device it supports. And when it comes to navigating and using these, you actually find there's some differences here as well. Now I think over time you get used to these. I personally haven't really got used to these types of controls. But you can see they're there as well. It's not quite the simple point and click. But then again, you've gone from a touch device to keyboard and mouse or trackpad. When you look at the actual apps on disk, the structure of the app bundle is quite different. Normally within here you have like contents, an info P list. It's quite a different structure here. But this is how these files, these app bundles now look on disk once they're installed. And it's worth bearing in mind that the structure might be different. If you're running scripts that are going to be reading and expecting the info P list to be in a certain area, this might trip up your system. But also the fact that when you're inventorying devices, when you're grabbing application data from or what's installed in your devices, these apps might well appear as well. So for the example here we're showing is Among Us, is showing in JAV Pro. It could well be that there's an app that's available for mobile devices as well as computers that you might have licensing against. So you might say, oh, you can't have X app installed, but it turns out someone might well actually have the mobile version. So it's worth bearing in mind if you're in an environment that's very tight on keeping on top of its licensing and who's got what installed. Another item is Rosetta 2. Now, what Rosetta 2 does, it enables a Mac with Apple Silicon to use apps built for a Mac with an Intel processor. And here's a KB that would be for end users. If you're trying to open an app and the app wants to install Rosetta or needs Rosetta to be installed because it's an Intel only app, how to install that, as well as how to set it for an application itself manually to open up in Rosetta, which can be handy for troubleshooting. Now, those of us admins, there's actually going to be a good chance that we're going to need to install Rosetta on all of our devices. Rich Trown has a great blog post here about how to do this, and he also links out to Graham Gilbert's method to do this as well. This is something that I will expect us admins having to do for a period of time now. And there's reasons for this. You might look at something from a vendor that says, hey, these apps work natively, they're going to be great, they're going to work fine on the on your Apple Silicon devices. However, when it comes to installing them, you might find there's other challenges. Now, as always, we have a Darren Wallace blog here, and the as always part is the fact that there's Adobe content here, which is really helpful. The example here is the fact that back in March, Adobe amended the admin console so that when you create a package within the Adobe admin console, you can specify if it's to be installed on Intel or Apple Silicon. Now, regardless of what the payload is, it would need to be installed on one of those two platforms, or either or those platforms. If you try and install the Intel package on a Silicon device, regardless of Rosetta, it will fail. However, the fun part here is the fact that this could be a Apple Silicon package, but with an Intel or a non-universal payload. So you still might need Rosetta to actually run the app that you're installing that needs Silicon, which is a bit convoluted, I know. Irene Briegel also has a great blog post on this as well, in a similar fashion. We're talking about distribution packages, and distribution packages, you would specify the architecture type that the package supports. What does this mean? Again, you might have a package that installs a universal or Apple Silicon item in the payload, but actually the package needs Rosetta to actually run the install process. Now, Apple have also updated the product build documentation to advise on changes they made within this. So if you're running product build on macOS Big Sur, then it should support both architectures. And this is really what's going to be affecting those distribution packages, which aren't that common, but still, without you auditing every single package you've got, reaching out to every vendor that you work with on this, you might well, the simplest way to proceed might well be just to install Rosetta for now. And then over time, work towards getting these things all ironed out and moved away. It could well be that these folks that you're working with have created this Rosetta app, but actually their build process, their packaging process is on an older Mac OS, and therefore it isn't going to have these architectures being supported. Again, pointing towards the blog post shown from Armin, there's steps on there on how to kind of add the different architectures, as well as this man package within Big Sur. Okay, Apple Configurator 2. So similar with the other two devices, with Apple Configurator 2, we can revive or restore an Apple Silicon device. However, how you do this depends on the device that you're looking to restore. So Apple, this whole KB is talking about the different methods you do this, different buttons you press, different key combinations, and it's filled out with these lovely images at the end, which is probably one of my ugliest slides, but probably one of the most informative, to show you where the cables actually need to be plugged in physically, as well as that merry dance of different buttons and key combos, etc., to initiate this process. However, once you've committed the muscle memory, once you put the time in and you've got this up and running, using Configurator to rapidly reprovision a device is great. It will be done in like 8-10 minutes, and the device will be ready to go through your ADE process again. And really is that quick. Obviously, the thing that you'll have there is the first time you run the process, you need to cache the OS. So a brand new OS coming out that first time might be a bit longer, but afterwards it's just going to churn through and be much, much quicker for you. We do still have macOS recovery though. And within the Platform Security Guide, Apple detailed different boot modes within Apple Silicon. And they do mention in here that we don't just have the recovery OS, we have a fallback recovery OS. Now, the recovery OS is accessed via holding the power button from the device being off. And the fallback is from double pressing the power button from the device being off and then holding it. Also within the macOS Big Sur guide, Apple have an article here where they talk about the different options available when you're in recovery. So I think it's really handy for us as admins, how to reinstall the OS, which is reinstalls it over the top, again keeping the user's files and settings intact, as well as the erase and reinstall. There's a nice process there that's quite slick, really. Within this is also details around setting a security policy, which we're going to talk about in a second, or in next few steps, as well as using the share disk feature. Now, with these new processors comes new firmware, which gives us new features. One of these new features is unified login. So I'm going to talk through this video of this. So here we are, we're looking at basically your standard 5 volt screen, the screen that we've known since 5 volt 2 has been around, really. Generally non-customizable. We can't do anything with this window, it's quite limited, it's just the list of users. However, with unified login, that window should reflect the settings that we have within our login options. But if we check here, in users and groups, unlock and click on login options, you'll see that we're setting name and password, but we're setting them via profile, hence them being grayed out. Might not be too easy to see on the video, but that's kind of what's happening here. So unfortunately, whilst unified login is a thing, it doesn't support those the profiles payloads for this. So instead, what you can do is use the sudo defaults right and write out the setting for the contact Apple login window with the show full name key and set the Boolean value of true, and then disk-util AP update preboot. When you next restart the machine and log in, what you should then see after you made that change is a username and password box. So again, it's a bit of a shame that we can't use a profile for this currently. Raise feedbacks, reach out to your Apple reps about that if you want to make that change. But we should be able to get to this name and password window. And the other cool thing around the fact that this firmware change and these are different options available also means that we can, things like VoiceOver are now supported over the login window, file vault preboot, as well as things like smart cards, etc. And with this change, something has to give as well, give and take all the time. So firmware passwords simply not supported, or not a feature as such on Apple Silicon. So in this article here, Apple say, hey, turn on 5 volt. There's actually something that's a bit more nuanced around this, because obviously us who enable firmware passwords, or we're enabling firmware passwords, are to stop devices from being booted externally, from to external volumes, as external volumes, and a few other options like that. However, still kind of covered with this. Now, this here is under this banner of what is called ownership or volume ownership. Within the Apple Platform Security Guide, there's loads of kind of really in-depth detail around this. And you find loads more acronyms. You know, owner identity key is the OIK. The user identity key is the UIK. The user identity certificate is the UCRT, Basic Attestation Authority, BAA. It goes really well in depth in here, as well as about how it will hand off the ownership between operating systems when, say, you're booting to another OS on a partition disk. Within here, though, there is one paragraph that's quite handy and helped in my head to kind of straighten why this is a thing and what kind of the rationale behind this. For a Mac with Apple Silicon, local security policy control has been delegated to an application running in the secure enclave. This software can utilize the user's credentials and the boot mode of the primary CPU to determine who can change the security policy and from what boot environment. This helps prevent malicious software from using these security policy controls against the user by downgrading them to gain more privileges. So for this, it's a method to stop a random app or a random process creating a user account and then changing the boot security of your device and therefore lowering the security of your Mac. Also, the fact that it can utilize the user's credentials and it then determines who can change. It means that there's actually a bit of authorization stuff going on there, which is a bit different to what we've seen before. So how do you become a volume owner? What does it do? Essentially, from what I've seen, from what I've looked at from here, accounts that have interactively logged into the Mac are the accounts that would be volume owners. So if you log into the login window with an account, you should become a volume owner. If you use the login command from terminal to log an account in, that should become a volume owner as well. It's about having this interactive login, and the login command, you have to pass your credentials through in plain text, etc. So it's up to you on your workflows, your security practices. Is this something that you wish to look to do or to roll out as a process or not? But it looks like they're the methods by which you become a volume owner. And what does it give you? Well, it gives you the ability to change boot policy security. If we break that down, things such as it'll give you the ability to install an OS type partition, to boot from an external disk, to enable Mac sharing mode, and to make changes to the startup security policy. Again, from what I've seen, this looks like you would also need to be an administrator. So accounts that have interactive logged in and are administrators will then be able to make those changes to the right. I'm going to show you some examples now. We're going to go through some of these different scenarios. Very much, if this stuff's all really key to your security posturing or some of the items that you use with macOS, and you're mourning the loss of firmware passwords, please give these things a go. To start off with, we're going to look at the startup security policy. Again, available within the various guides out there from Apple. There are three main settings within the of security policies within macOS. You've got the full security, which behaves like iOS and iPadOS. Only allows booting from software that is known to be the latest. Reduced security allows us to run older versions. And it's also the reduced level is also a level that's required for supporting booting kernel extensions. Permissive. This policy level allows users that are building, signing, and booting their own new kernels and stuff like that. So you're going to most of the time, as administrators, we're actually mostly going to be running reduced security, and I'll try and explain why in a sec. So in order to make these changes, we need to boot the machine into recovery, so that's holding down the power button. From here, when it loads up, we need to now authenticate as a volume owner who's also an admin. So we have my account here. So I need to authenticate. And from here, if I click on Utilities and start up Security Utility. Now, because my disk has been encrypted, I now need to go in here and unlock the disk as well. And now we can view the security policy. So this is currently full security, but you'd also see on there you've got reduced security. Now with the reduced security, if you're enrolled into an MDM, you should actually find that bottom box there is going to be checked. So you're in full security, but the MDM is configured so that it's allowed then to remotely manage kernel extensions and automatic software updates to your device. And this is where the MDM is using its bootstrap token in order to achieve and do these items. So it's a bit bizarre. You will be between that. You will be between full security and reduced, but that's generally where most devices, especially devices that ADE enrolled into most modern MDMs, will actually sit. So now let's look at system extensions, or kernel extensions, or legacy system extensions, and/or system extensions. It really depends on what document you read and where on this. You can kind of call them the same thing at times, but they're also quite different. And calling them this and having this as a subject header didn't really fit very nicely with the slides. So hey, system extensions is. Now kernel extensions are still a thing, or KEX with Apple Silicon, but there's different ways of approving them depending on the way in which you're enrolled into an MDM. And Apple again have detail of this, and this link is again linked in the GitHub page. But the option at the bottom there, the automated device enrollment, where it says MDM solutions can manage this automatically, that is the functionality that's enabled by that checkbox we saw a moment ago. It stops security being checked. And this is another thing that's worth bearing in mind. Whenever the set of approved kernel extensions changes, or either after initial approval or the version is updated, a restart is required. So if you install a kernel extension, or if you reinstall, or if you install a new version of a kernel extension, then a restart is going to be required. Depending on your MDM, and this is an example from Jamf, you could trigger this. You could trigger the restart. Jamf have an API endpoint you can use that will restart the device, and it will rebuild the kernel cache, so which basically makes those changes needed, not just from a standard restart. Rebuilding the kernel cache when it does the restart will also remove those KEX prompts, because it will load the KEX as needed type of thing. And you can notify the user of a little persistent notification that says you need to restart. Again, items here in the general requirements: a bootstrap token is required for Jamf Pro. It's to be described within Jamf Pro, as well as the allowance management of kernel extensions and automatic software updates. Option to be enabled in start security. With a current version of Jamf Pro, current being 10.29, it's been a couple of releases since. I don't know exactly when this was enabled. Oh, there you go, it says 10.28, sorry, at the top of the page. This should all be the default when you ADE enroll a device. What happens if you update a kernel extension on a device without going through this process? Well, the user will probably receive a prompt here like this. The app advising it needs them to go into system preferences, security and privacy in order to allow the extension to load. And then within this, it depends on the kernel extension payload. You can actually have there's actually an option there to allow non-admins to approve. In this instance, it's not set, so someone would have to authenticate to unlock the preference pane to then click the allow button. Regardless of this, with the allow button clicked, the person would then need to restart. So if, again, you require kernel extensions to be installed as part of your security posturing, etc., this is a workflow to test and work with. Even similarly with system extensions, there are challenges around that, how that does work. For example, installing, you still need to do a restart on many occasions. Uninstalling, you'll need to do a restart. It can be quite disruptive, so if these are things that you're having to use, please give these a test and figure out workflows, and obviously great communication for your end users. Now, booting external startup disks. There's a blog post that came up recently at the time of recording from Howard Oakley, and gives another example here of volume ownership, where you're trying to boot to an external volume, but there isn't any authorized users as such within the pre-boot sequence, or being recorded as such to say that you're allowed to do this. So you'd have to authorize via credentials of a known user on that volume. But this is how you can kind of boot to external media. And now we have Mac sharing mode. Now, Mac sharing mode is the replacement for target disk mode. With Mac sharing mode, it's SMB connectivity over a Thunderbolt or USB cable, not not disk, not like an external disk as it was before. To enable, again, you go into recovery, and I'll show you this now. We'll skip that slide for a sec. So you'd boot the machine into recovery. Click on options again, boot picker. And then from within here, we would need to unlock again as a volume owner who happens to be an admin as well. And then if we click on utilities at the top of the screen, and then share disk. Again, we're going to need to unlock the volume if it's disk encrypted. and then we click start sharing. Now the volume should show on under the connected Mac under network as a share that you can connect to, and you can connect to as a guest. One of the big changes with this, because this is SMB and it's not file level, it's not like a disk, this does mean you can't ASR restore to it. So is imaging dead? Yes. We've seen on here we can quickly provision devices using configurator 2. We've got the recovery and the fallback recovery to also reprovision from Apple or via your caching servers. And now here we can see that yes, we can target disk mode, well, as such as Mac Share mode obviously is now called. However, this does not give you the same level of functionality as target disk mode because it's not an external disk, it's SMB. So therefore you can't ASR restore to it. So yes, please, imaging's dead. ADE, work with those workflows. This is the way forward. And I think the drum's thoroughly beaten. I expect nobody listening to this will be shocked by this, but yeah, it's gone. Kind of talking about things that have gone as well. So this is the last section here. I'm talking about MDM lock. Now, when I did this talk back in March, the security platform guide for England, Great Britain, was only a PDF. Downloading the PDF, which I've unfortunately misplaced now, on the page here, it said that remote lock isn't available for a Mac with Apple Silicon. Remote lock, when you look at the platform security guide now that's fully online, it's a term that's not used a great deal. It's mainly activation lock. There's like 2 references for remote lock, and none of it in this sentence here has now disappeared. However, locking an MDM locking a device is really not an option for an Apple Silicon device. I'll give you some examples. So here we are, we're logged into a machine, the user's reading a fantastic blog, the data jar blog, which is obviously amazing, and we lock the device. The device goes back to recovery. This is something we've seen before. We've skipped boot picker, we've just gone straight to recovery though. And again, a volume owner who's an admin from within here can now activate the machine. If they restart, they're going to restart back into the OS. So if part of your process of when someone leaves your organization is the fact that you want to lock a device and to ship it back, maybe there's some legal hold requirements around that, you might need to look at actually a DLP solution or something that backs up the data, makes a copy of it somewhere, etc. The alternative with this right now, kind of been advised, would be potentially to reset the person's password before you send the lock command. And some MDMs allow you to reset the user accounts under certain conditions, etc. But there might be a method by which change their password, lock the machine, then yes, the machine's in that step there. However, what happens if we then decide to do it? Now my account here, who was a volume owner a moment ago, I've now made it a standard account. And if you want to test this, by the way, demote an account and run that update preboot command that we saw earlier with the unified login, and then run these test processes. But here we are, trying to activate. Nothing's really happening on the machine, but it fails to create the request. And I don't really have any options apart from start, restart, or erase. So if the machine hasn't got any volume owners who are admins, the option you might have here is actually the only option the end user might present with is to erase the device. So if your goal here is to protect the contents of the disk for reasons, again, you need to look at alternatives here. And essentially, just really don't use the MDM lock command. If you have workflows that need this, you need to go through and find alternatives. Speak to your MDM vendor. This is something that I think we shouldn't be able to do on Apple Silicon devices, and not get ourselves tied up in these issues. But it's something that's worth calling out. It isn't supported. Again, currently, who knows? Soon. And I'm not going to make you wait the hour and 25 minutes for this. Now again, here's the link to our talk notes. So there's every section, every headed section, there's links within there to pertinent items as well. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you found it informative. Thank you. Bye bye.